Hey there, my name's Sebastian, and this is Talk That Pod, a podcast where I have conversations with some of the most interesting podcasters in the world. My guest today is James Wolner, creator of Dakota Spotlight, an acclaimed true crime podcast with a focus on telling stories about crime in North Dakota, and it has a whopping 12 seasons under its belt. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And it's not just North Dakota anymore. It's kind of the upper Midwestern region at this point. I'm really happy to be here.
Of course. So according to your website, Dakota Spotlight started from a barstool conversation in 2019 about a suspicious death in western North Dakota. Can you sort of take me back to that moment? Was there something specific about that first story that said to you, I have to turn this into a podcast?
Absolutely. And I talk about it in the podcast itself. And the interesting thing is, I don't know that I would start Dakota Spotlight today for the same reason I did then, because of just the way things have evolved since then. And maybe that'll make sense here when I describe what started me out on that first season. It was kind of, when people were starting to say things like, your facts are not my facts, your truth is not my truth. And I started getting very nervous about the erosion of truth itself, facts, and journalism was being, basically, what should we say, thrown in the mud. Everything was fake news. Can't trust journalists anymore. And I just got very, very uncomfortable watching the news. And we're talking, this is 7 years ago now. If I knew then how things would evolve to today, I would have been happy where I was. Like, it was relatively okay in 2019. But I decided I can't watch the news anymore. Again, this is 7 years ago. This is driving me crazy. There's so much gaslighting going on. And I had this conversation in a bar in western North Dakota about a death in the area, and people in the bar were saying that he had been murdered by, this is western North Dakota we're talking about. He was killed by the Boston Mafia, and I'm just like, well, where are you getting that information from,
Right.
And also I said, well, why don't we just go ask the cops what happened, do you have any facts, and they're, again, you'll never find out. No one will ever tell you the truth. And I almost kind of started Dakota Spotlight as a spite season, the first one, because I'm going to do two things at once. I'm going to stop watching the news. I'm going to put myself in my own, private space for a while. And I'm just going to focus all my efforts on finding out the truth about this one thing. What happened to Victor Newberry? And I thought it was going to be pretty straightforward, and then it turned out to be much more interesting and crazy than I thought. I thought that Boston Mafia thing, there would be no basis for it. And then I don't want to spoil too much of it, but it just turned in, and it became my opportunity to do something I'd always wanted to do my whole life, which was investigative journalism. I studied photojournalism in college. And then I fell into IT after that, web development, database development. So I never had an opportunity to actually apply my skills as an investigator and fact checker and researcher. So I just poured myself into that season as a type of self-medication almost from the craziness that was going on in the news 7 years ago.
Yeah, it keeps getting worse, doesn't it? But that's an interesting career arc that you've had. It's neat that you've been able to apply what you studied in school and didn't necessarily practice for a while, but then you wound up using those skills and that knowledge in this podcast. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on the fact that Dakota Spotlight became the first podcast that was preserved by the Dakota State Archives. How did that come about? What did you feel like when that sort of came out? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how that came about. I think I was a little bit fortunate. I don't want to say lucky, but the timing was a little bit ripe for the archives there in North Dakota to start getting more on board with digital archiving. And then I came along with some local stories that got a lot of attention. And I think, I spent a lot of time there doing research. So it was a great moment. I was very proud of that to be the first one. And I'm hoping that by now they've moved on and there's a lot more digital content archived there as well.
I believe it was season 3 that wound up getting adapted into an Emmy award-winning documentary. What was that like? That's not something you come across a lot on the podcasting world. So what did you sort of go through there, and what was that process like?
Yeah, so what happened there was after my first 2 seasons, I was hired by Forum Communications out of Fargo to continue doing my podcast. Basically, they said, you've kind of shown what you can do. How about coming to work for us? And so for a while there, until I went independently again, I was getting paid a wage to do this. And, true crime is huge. It was huge even then, and getting really popular. And someone said, while you're going out to interview, the way it worked out was that we filmed my interviewees when I was making the podcast. So I'd set up these interviews, and it was kind of like, how about we send a Derek Fletcher along with you, very talented filmmaker, which we're making another film, by the way. We can mention that if you want later. But
oh, excellent.
So he came along. And excellent filmmaker. So we filmed these interviews. I was there for the audio, really. I was thinking primarily that. And at the time, I think the idea was, well, we'll film some bonus content for your podcast, right? We can do some trailers and stuff. And then we ended up getting such spectacular interviews, primarily with a couple of former detectives from Bismarck PD. When we showed this material to others at Forum Communications, our employer, they're like, this is just great stuff. And we just kept working on it. And then Derek and I sat down together, and he's kind of like, have you got any direction on what we should do with it? And like, no, let's just do what we want. Let's just make a film we think would be good. And we dove into it. And I scripted. So simultaneously for doing the audio podcast, I was scripting for a film. And also doing like voiceover specifically for the film, and then voiceover for the podcast. So the podcast itself, it's called The House on Sweet and 7th, is much more detailed. It's like 7 episodes, I think. And the film is 45 minutes long. And I still speak with Derek often because we're making another film, and we kind of shake our heads like, how did we pull that off back then? We got so much done in about 2 or 3 months of work. I guess it was during the pandemic. And we kind of like, wow, we got a lot of work done. A podcast and a film in 2.5, 3 months. And as you mentioned, it went on to win a regional Emmy. So it was quite the ride. And I kind of joke, I'm already breaking my promise to myself that I would never make another film, because then I could say every film I've ever made has won an Emmy. But almost ready to put out another film, which is also based on a season of Dakota Spotlight. That's season 7. It's called Call Me Shelley, Disappearance of Shelley Juleson in Bismarck, North Dakota, which is another this one's going to really work well as a film because there's just so many, it's unsolved, and there's so many threads to pull on.
And when is that coming out?
Well, hopefully by the time this podcast comes out, we're going to be pretty darn close. A few people have seen it. We'll be sharing it with a few people and then doing the final. Derek Fletcher is an amazing filmmaker, and he knows all that. Whatever the last stuff you do with the film, with the color, and I told him I'd like to help with the sound, obviously, because I'm a sound guy. But I would say by this summer, we're hoping to be showing it locally in a few venues, like in Fargo and Bismarck and things like that.
Excellent. I've heard you say that you prioritize ethical storytelling and sort of treating victims with care and respect. And in true crime, I think that can be a really fine line to walk. Can you walk me through your process sort of for deciding how much detail you have in your stories? How do you approach sort of families of victims?
Sure. This sounds like a couple different questions, actually. And one of them, I don't know how this is going to come across, but it just feels kind of like a feeling. Like when it comes to what content you're going to share, where does the line go from detailed to gruesome, for example?
Right.
It feels like I know what feels right for me, and I'm not saying I always get it right by any means, but I do know, and there are other true crime podcasts out there who blatantly, or not blatantly, they just say straight up, we're sharing the gory details. This is what we do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they're considering themselves to be ethical or not, but for as far as the process to decide what's included and what's excluded, a lot of it has to do with a feeling. And I know that's not a very clear answer, but kind of the way we live our lives in other ways, just out in public, interacting with other humans, what's rude and what's a funny joke and what's rude.
Sure.
I mean, I think we just kind of all operate under some kind of moral umbrella that we don't even know where exactly it came from. But as far as approaching the families, the other part of your question, I've had some really good success there. And I think the best feedback I got was season 9 of Dakota Spotlight. Is that right? I get them mixed up sometimes, but the Mandan Murders is about just this horrific quadruple homicide in Bismarck, Mandan, North Dakota. And the murderer was apprehended finally, and he actually took his own life in prison without ever explaining why he killed these 4 people.
Right.
And so I was very proud of that season, or I am very proud of that season. I interviewed family members of all 4 victims were on board. And that was partially due to I had earned, this was season 9. So I had earned some local trust or whatever, when I approached these people, they talked it through and they even said, we think you're the right person to tell this story. Families of the victims. And I got the family members of the perpetrator on the podcast as well.
Mm.
And then that case, I did it a little differently. First of all, I wrote them a letter. It was long in the mail, back in the day when you put a stamp on an envelope and that whole thing.
That long ago, yeah?
Yeah. And I just told them the way I felt, which was, I understand how hard this must be for you guys. And I'm interested in talking to you. If you would be available, please consider it. There's different ways of doing it. And I can't remember the letter exactly, but I do remember their response was, it was such a thoughtful letter is what got them on board. Like, this was just so well thought through and well put that they decided to talk to me about potentially being on the podcast. And then in the end, I did not interview them, but they just said, can we write an open letter to the public and read it ourselves on your podcast? So I met them. And so this perpetrator's mother and 2 sisters read this quite long letter to the public where they explained different things, like, first of all, how sorry they are, and thanks for the support of the community that they got. And also some inside, like, people are wondering, did you ever suspect your son, brother, that he could do something like that? Were there signs, and so on? So they went through all of that. And that's the season I'm kind of most proud of in that aspect. And I do remember specifically the family saying, like, your letter was just so well thought through that that's what got us to actually even consider it, So I think it's a lot of putting yourself in other people's shoes to do a show like this.
You mentioned also that you've returned now to producing Dakota Spotlight independently after several years with Forum. I'm curious what pushed you to go independent again, and sort of are there things you had to learn or kind of unlearn in making that transition?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was very grateful for my time there. As I said, I had a steady paycheck back then. I didn't have to worry about rent as much. And I guess the surprise was I thought a bigger organization would mean that I would be more enabled to do a lot more things. And we did make the film. That was amazing. But then when it came down to things like, in any big organization, anytime you're going to spend some money, even if it's just $100, there's decision making along the way. And for example, it's going to cost $100 to request this public record from Montana.
Right.
That became a process I had to navigate and argue for why I thought, well, maybe if we get this document, we'll find out what happened to missing Barbara Cotton.
Right.
And at some point, I also kind of felt like, I'm 61 now. I feel like I went to all this work to make this show. And if I'm able to pull it off, if I can squeeze by, there's nothing like just calling the shots yourself. It fits my personality. I think a lot of people would feel the same way. And I just thought, it'll be more efficient in a lot of ways. And just a sense of freedom, I guess. And it was time, but I'm very appreciative of my time there. Like I said, we did some great stuff. So
now, true crime podcasts, at least from what I can see, often chase sort of high-profile national cases. But your podcast is very rooted in sort of regional stories from North Dakota and, as you said, the kind of broader Midwest. What do you think draws listeners sort of from outside the region into these more local stories?
Well, I think it might be, I'm not sure, but it might be just wanting to experience something different. Like, I find myself searching for true crime podcasts in rural Australia just because I want to sort of take part. I want to hear about something else. And then I'd also think the upper Midwest has this, Coen Brothers Fargo movie appeal to it, where it's got a little bit of this popular culture part of it, and the Fargo TV series for that matter. So it's kind of this interesting pocket in that way too. In fact, I'm really leaning into the Coen Brothers Fargo movie aspect in season 13, which based on what you told me, it's season 13 is probably out by the time people are hearing this. So
okay,
I think it's some of those things, and I really hope what it is that people are just appreciating good storytelling. And in Dakota Spotlight, I really slow down. It's a slow burn often. And I don't know how much you want to get into this topic, but I think we have enough YouTube shorts, reels, and this kind of bubblegum for your brain content that just keeps people chewing constantly, but you never get anywhere. I don't think that's why we're here. I think oral storytelling has been around, thousands of years?
Yeah.
And I think we're kind of hardwired to use our mind to visualize based on words that we're consuming, and not necessarily in a hurry. Like, I don't understand. Well, I guess I find myself scrolling my phone too, and I have to catch myself, and I stop, and sometimes it's very rewarding. Like, if I need to just relax, it depends what you're looking for, obviously. If I need to just take my mind off of, episode 4 of season 13, script editing, I can scroll my phone a little bit. But I just don't think that is why we're here, to just continually consume little snippets of information.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to answer your question. I guess I hope a lot of people come back to North Dakota Spotlight because of the format, which is a slow burn kind of documentary style, longer story. I love the research. One of my favorite parts of doing this is the research. I for this season 13, I spent like 5 days researching where one of the person's father came from in Norway, like an insane person. I kept telling myself, get back to your script writing. But I had to know where this guy came from in Norway. And the whole, like 4 or 5 days of research online comes down to one line in the podcast: their father immigrated from Norway in 1904. That's the content I got out of. I mean, it's not a very smart work process, but it's, well, actually, I feel like it's related to what we were just talking about with the scrolling of the phone. The reason I like the research is because you get focused on something. And it's kind of like that being in the moment thing you're supposed to do when you meditate and all that stuff. It feels like a type of meditation when you get into like, okay, so why were his kids in Montana in 1920, but where's the daughter? And then I'm off on this research tangent for 2 days. But then then when I'm done, when I put out this season, I'm talking about season 13 now, I will be the world's authority on this family and this story. Like it's a crazy thing to realize, like I am the authority of this story. No one's even heard it before. So sorry if I'm rambling a little bit.
No, it's great. So talking about research, because obviously you just said how much you enjoy it and you've been doing this podcast for a while, I'm curious how the advent of AI and all of the sort of chatbots that we have at our disposal now, how has that impacted your research process, if at all?
Yeah, it's a great question about AI. I think, I've checked it out, obviously, and once in a while when I'm sitting around by myself and I don't have any other sounding board, I'll bounce something off of AI, like, what does this sound like to you? And sometimes you get I feel like sometimes you get amazing insight, like, wow, that's really sharp. And then sometimes you just get absolute rubbish, right? Like you do not understand what I'm even trying to achieve. Like, and it's,
yeah.
So I'm on the fence quite a bit there. It can be, what I use AI for, what the best part is to like run a, if that's even AI, for transcripts, getting transcripts of audio. And once I got this huge, like 100-page document, and I just asked AI to help me find places in this document. What page is this segment on? So that's a great help that way. But I think relying on it to help us think too much, and as far as how to tell a story, we'll just end up like, I don't know, a bunch of cloned storytellers or something. So, but it has helped. It has helped efficiency when, for example, let's say I have a hour and 20-minute conversation, or like this conversation we're having now. If you're later thinking, didn't James say something about whatever? Before, you got to listen to the whole thing again. But with AI, you can run your MP3 through, get it transcribed, or maybe you don't even have to do that anymore. Maybe you can just say, hey, listen to this and tell me what's the timestamp where James bashes AI, and then it'll tell you.
Yeah, so I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about what you've done to promote your podcast. How do you feel about the fact that the true crime genre is extremely saturated? Do you think that there's room for new podcasts to thrive? And if you are a new podcaster coming into the genre, what do you do to stand out? How do you get traction?
Those are great questions. The way I feel about it is a smidgen of embarrassment. And that is mostly my personality is such I've never considered myself to be a follower.
Right.
So here's an example. You heard of the band The Police, right? And when I was in 7th, 8th grade, I was the first person in school to have heard of The Police, Roxanne, and it was so cool to like The Police because it was my band. And I wasn't a follower, right? I was,
Yeah.
And then they got to be really big, and honestly, it wasn't very fun anymore. Because I felt like now people think I'm a bandwagon jumpee. Is that a word? So with the true crime podcasting thing, I kind of feel a little uncomfortable sometimes telling people I have a true crime podcast. And it's just my personality where I would rather feel, I want to believe I'm more original than that, but apparently I'm not. And I'm sorry, you had another part of that question, didn't you?
Yeah. So I guess the question was, if you have a new podcaster coming into the genre, what can they do to stand out? How do they launch a show that goes on to have success?
Right. So I think the secret is out on the fact that you can niche your podcast geographically, which is, I have to say, was a huge advantage for me at the time. I don't know if I was the first true crime podcast in North Dakota, but I was definitely one of the first 2 or 3. I could be wrong about that. But I was the first one to do it the way I did it and get some real traction. And so obviously that's one way, but people are probably running out of geographical areas that have not been saturated already. But I guess I would want to say, and I don't even know if this is completely the best advice, but in the end, if you're not going to be yourself, it's kind of like, why are you doing it? So as opposed to looking at the market of podcasts and asking AI, what things should I do to be successful? What I actually did I didn't mention this earlier when we talked about season 1. I sat down and I decided, first of all, it's a beautiful place to be in before you release your first episode or your first season. You'll never have that opportunity back again. One of the things I loved was that nobody knew it was coming. So there's no, when's your next season? Or I hope it's as good as last time or similar, or nobody in the world knew it was coming. And I could have spent 10 years if I wanted. I probably spent, 4 or 5 months on it. But what I did, I sat down and I said, I'm just going to make a podcast that I would like. And it's such a great place to be in because you have no thoughts of downloads or, what people are expecting or anything. And I don't know that this is the best advice for people who really want to get a bunch of listeners, but I feel like I got to say it, be you and do what you want to do, because no matter what you do, you're going to get criticism. And why not at least be yourself?
Yeah.
Sure. I don't know.
I also think in podcasting, and specifically in true crime, word of mouth seems to sort of drive downloads sometimes, I think. Can you point to a moment or a season or maybe even a single episode where you saw a big spike and that was sort of driven organically?
Yes, I think that would have been in my 5th season with about missing Barbara Cotton, Williston, North Dakota. That was the one where, now it's almost surreal to think back that nobody had done anything on Barbara Cotton before. And it'd been on my radar for a while, and I contacted her, childhood friends, and then I started this. I pre-produced 5 episodes of the Barbara Cotton story, and it ended up taking off. That I put them out 1 episode a day for 5 days. And by day 3, Williston Police Department was calling me and saying, no, we want to talk to you. Like, because I was basically saying they won't answer my calls, and and the community of Williston really came out there. That's how I really got a bump in listeners, and also my Facebook group during that season. That's the time I really noticed that it kind of blew up a little bit, where people really were like, how come? I don't know if people had not heard about Barbara, but everyone was on board. It was a great feeling. We ended up having an event in Williston. I think it was on the 40th anniversary of her disappearance in a park there on a very cold and windy day, and law enforcement came out and everything. It definitely happened. That was a great experience.
I recently asked another podcaster that has a similar structure to yours in the sense that they have various seasons of the podcast. And I was asking them about how they think about sort of nurturing your audience, keeping them interested in between seasons. I'm wondering if you've done anything there that's sort of specific.
Yeah, that's where it gets, when you start doing this as a business, as opposed to that first season, even my second season, nobody was, expecting anything.
Right.
Apparently, basically for nurturing the listeners who are sort of dedicated to the show, I mean, I can't thank them enough for being patient, because I do feel like I don't want to make them wait 7 months for anything. So I put out interviews with I've been putting out some interviews with other true crime podcasters. I try to put out some one episode case snapshots, as I call them, which are kind of like a little, a mini, it's not a season, but it's Dakota Spotlight episode with the same format, with some soundscape immersion, good storytelling research. And I do struggle with that, because I feel like, they shouldn't have to wait, but also that takes time away from the actual product.
The main thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But basically I would like to say, I just can't thank my listeners enough for, I do get comments when I do sort of say, like, sorry, it's going to be a couple more weeks. Once in a while I get comments from, it's okay, we understand, we can't wait to hear your next, and that's just such a relief to hear,
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate that way. And
you've also got this thing called Spotlight Plus, which is, I guess, a subscriber membership tier alongside the regular free show. For podcasters that are trying to monetize their shows, what's sort of the philosophy behind how you structured that offering?
Sure. Yeah. And also I just started after all these years, I'm finally on Patreon, which is same price. It's $5 a month. And same thing, you get the whole season without any ads. And so now when season 13 comes out, plus subscribers can binge the whole. It'll be 5 episodes on day one. They don't have to wait week to week, right? So my philosophy on that is twofold. On the one hand, I believe people deserve the opportunity to not have to listen to advertising. And $5 a month and people can, cancel when they want, but for $5, you can binge a whole season, not have to listen to the episodes. I think that's something people deserve. If I could afford it, I wouldn't put any ads in anything, right? If I won the lottery or something. But the other side of the coin is I also feel like I deserve to be able to pay my rent and my electricity bill. So
sure.
And fans, some people want to support the show, right? So the subscription tier for me feels like this sort of cozy place where everyone wins a little bit, and that's basically it. I once in a while I'll get a comment. I've seen people comment online. I don't know if you've seen this. Podcasts should never have any commercials. Like, okay. If you have a donut shop, can I just walk in, take a donut, and walk out the door? Like, where did all this come from? So,
Yeah.
I promise though, if I do win, $10 million on the lottery, all of my episodes will be free for everyone. Like, I don't need that much money.
I think most podcasters would do that as well.
Yeah.
As you look ahead to more seasons of Dakota Spotlight, what does growth mean to you now? Is it more listeners, more regions, more mediums like film and video, or are you sort of hoping to achieve something a little bit more subtle, like how engaged your listeners are?
That's a great question, Sebastian. That's a great question. So I'll answer one thing. I am not leaning into what Spotify has declared to be the future of podcasting, where everything is going to be video and people are going to be watching them on their couch on a big screen TV. I think for a show like yours, that would be beneficial if people want to actually see our faces for some reason. But for me, a podcast is not visual. I think back to thousands of years of fireside storytelling where our minds are engaged in something for the imagination, which you get to imagine all yourself without any distractions that the filmmaker might make for you. And you're also not simultaneously hijacked, held hostage on your couch, right? Looking at this thing on the wall. That's the great thing about audio podcasts. You can do other things at the same time, right? So I'm not buying, I'm not trashing it either. If people want to watch podcasts on their big screen TV, some shows like more interviews like this, great. So I won't be leaning that way. I will be releasing, as I said earlier, a documentary film. I could see doing more of those in the future. But as far as growth, like what I would consider to be growth, I think I would just be most, more listeners would be great. But I hope people keep coming back because of the storytelling and the format, and they don't just want to be scrolling shorts on their phone. For me, it would be a victory if there are a few hundred people out there in the world who God, that time we listened to that podcast while drinking a glass of wine on the patio, that was just the most amazing experience. And to have content like that is quote unquote evergreen, that, will still be good 15 years from now or whatever. So I hope more and more people discover the show for what it is, more than just more and more content, or, I don't need millions of followers. I just want to find the right people who appreciate this kind of storytelling, and that'll make my day.
Yeah. And just going back to the topic of video there, I've talked to a bunch of podcasters now. I mean, even in the past, there seems to be a real tension there between the amount of work required to produce video on any given podcast, right? The editing time doubles, triples. It's a lot more work. But there's a real tension there, I feel like, between that and the fact that video can lead to better discoverability of your podcast. There's no question.
Yeah.
A lot of the platforms, like you said, seem to be prioritizing video, like Spotify. YouTube is a huge way for podcasts to distribute now and get discovered. So yeah, I don't know. I see that tension all over the place right now in the podcasting world. So that's an interesting take that you have. But I want to talk to you a little bit about sort of what you see in the true crime space in terms of, there have been true crime podcasts that have led to sort of reopening cold cases and sort of influencing real investigations. And I'm curious how you feel about that. Do you feel a responsibility there, or even sort of some tension knowing that your show, could put pressure on law enforcement or prosecutors or even families as well?
That's another great question. I definitely feel a lot of responsibility on the family side. And again, I'm not going to say I've gotten this right 100% of the time, but I would be much more. I would. What am I trying to say? If the family is not on board, that's a much bigger deal than if, law enforcement is not on board for some reason. I can't say that I feel a lot of friction. I don't feel bad putting pressure on law enforcement to look harder into a case. I guess I don't. Especially if the family is standing there saying, we want answers. We all understand that a cold case from 30, 40 years ago can't be the top priority in a police department. But when you literally feel yourself being gaslit by the law enforcement agency themselves, I have even, that's happened, or just not getting a phone call answer or an email after a year and a half, I have less concern about putting pressure on them. And I mean, some of these podcasts out there have just done amazing work, right? And it's kind of sad in a way that it comes down to public opinion and pressure. But if a podcast like In the Dark gets enough people on the horn, pretty soon the mayor's calling the police department and say, "Hey, I'm getting tired of these phone calls. We gotta, we gotta put more guys on this case." So I think it's a very useful, just like other media, right? Investigative journalists at newspapers and others. So I don't know if I answered your question really, but
yeah, I think you did. Now, from what I understand, you lived in Sweden for more than 20 years. Is that right?
Yeah, that's 22 years. Yeah.
Wow. How did that experience of sort of what I can imagine is a very different media culture and approach to maybe crime and justice, how did that shape the way you think about how America does it and how Americans consume true crime? Is there a big difference there?
That's a good question. True crime is big in Sweden as well now. And I guess the best answer I can give you is how it's made, having that experience gave me some perspective on how maybe Americans consume story or appreciate story, the stories they want to hear. And I got to get this right. I don't know how I can say this, but Americans accept or maybe want a little bit more of. Okay, so the word sappy can be used as a negative term. Well, that's so sappy. I think in Sweden, people might consider my show in some circumstances kind of sappy, whereas an American audience kind of likes to lean into sort of some heartfelt, emotional. Now it sounds like I'm trying to say Swedish people don't have a heart. That's not what I mean. Don't send me emails. But I would say Swedes have a more analytical, sort of a little more analytical and critical thinking eye when they're consuming a story. So they're a little bit less interested in, if it's kind of like the way patriotism has a nuance to it. Like I would say Americans are more patriotic than Swedes are. Swedes don't get teared up when they hear their national anthem necessarily.
Right.
And I
think that's more.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's more broadly European as well. That kind of attitude as well.
So I only use that as an example because it's kind of the same thing where when I'm scripting an episode I'm scripting it for Americans, basically, I would say. And I know, okay, this is going to be a little bit sappy for some people, but it's also a really beautiful scene in its own way. So I guess that's sort of the nuances that I can kind of take away from that Swedish versus American As far as stories go, I could be wrong about the whole thing. I might get some emails and say, no, you're absolutely wrong.
Now, I feel like podcasts have sort of given or created a platform for stories that a lot of major media organizations, they won't touch. They'll just pass over. And I think a lot of the time these stories are from, rural or sort of underserved communities. Do you feel like the level of independent audio journalism that you're doing is sort of closing that coverage gap that traditional media left behind?
I think so. I definitely think it could. And unfortunately, it's a lot of us are working, in a space where we're not really making money or not much money. Where, so in traditional journalism, like a newspaper, if they're not making money, they're not doing the work. So it's
right,
or they have to, pay their wages. So I think it is closing the gap, but I don't know how sustainable it's going to be unless we start charging more for subscription tiers or something. I don't know, but
yeah,
I do think it's serving a purpose, and in some of these news deserts, especially,
Yeah, I think you're right about sort of, the fact that good journalism takes money, right? You need some form of income to do good journalism. And I feel like the big media companies that have, erected successful paywalls, they were forced into it. They had to do it because the money just wasn't there otherwise. And I think that applies to small, independent journalism as well. You still need to, put food on the table while you're doing the good work that, other people pass over. So
exactly.
I'm also curious, I don't know exactly how big your audience is, but I imagine, because I think this is true for other sizable true crime podcasts, that when you do put out episodes, when you do put out seasons, you get feedback from your listeners. And I'm wondering if you ever get feedback from listeners that says, hey, I think I figured this out, or hey, I have a tip here, or you know what I mean? Like people wanting to solve the crime along with you. And I'm wondering how you feel about that, having these audiences sort of behave like an informal public interest newsroom.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great asset there, right? And so I think some people might be more inclined or feel more comfortable reaching out to a podcaster than to their local police department. So there's a great opportunity there. I will say I gotta share this story though, because I think it's kind of funny. I do feel like I've gotten some insight into what it must be like to be a detective at a law enforcement agency and just get some honestly wacky tips that, that you're like, really the same person, the Zodiac killer also killed Billy Wolf in North Dakota. I mean, that's a real tip I got.
Yeah.
And I can,
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And I feel like I've become, who knows? I feel like I've become a little better at spotting those kind of, sometimes it's not just what they're saying, it's how they're saying it, right? And sometimes it's 30-page long emails. I kind of feel like someone is in a state almost. And right. I'm just saying I have more understanding and maybe empathy for cold case detectives who sometimes say, I just can't get to all my tips. If you get 100 of those, oof.
Yeah, the volume on that must be.
That's what I was going to say. I
overwhelming.
I understand now. I've seen in movies and different contexts where law enforcement says we don't want to ask the public for tips right now.
Yeah,
and before I was like, why would you not want that? But now I kind of get it. Like you're going to get everything from the Zodiac killer did it to, Ronald Reagan's illegitimate grandson. I don't know.
When you zoom out and look at sort of the cumulative impact of Dakota Spotlight over all these seasons on families, law enforcement, listeners. What do you hope will be its sort of long-term contribution to the conversation about crime and justice in the Midwest?
Yeah, that's another great question, Sebastian. And I don't even think it's about crime and justice. When it comes to what I hope my contribution would be is, I think of a few individuals, some of the families. This is going to sound a little sappy. See, now I'm going to sound a little sappy. But, the families of some of these stories, God, this sounds so sappy. But I do feel like, for me, it's enough to know that this one, a couple different seasons was so important for like 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
And at the same time, a whole bunch of people came along for the ride. And kind of what I mentioned before, I hope there's, a few hundred people out there who have a very fond memory of listening to one of these seasons in some context. They'll remember where they were when they listened. And it was just a really nice experience for them. I'm sorry I don't have an answer for the crime and justice part of that. I don't know where this all lands. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, and before I move on to my final 2 questions, do you have any questions for me, James?
I just want to say that I love your newsletter, Find That Pod. And when it came across my radar, I was kind of looking into this area myself. Not a newsletter, but I was just like, there is a gap here. Like, how come the podcast that everyone already knows about is at the top of the Apple app? Why are we being shown podcasts that we are or that don't need any help right now?
Sure.
And I was thinking, like, there's a business model in here somewhere. And then when your email newsletter came out, I was so impressed with just the branding. And just, I think you had like a great, this is your wheelhouse, but I think I remember reading, podcasts are hard to find. I can help. Something simple like that. And I was like, oh my goodness, I would have ruined that. I would have spent so much. I would have had 7 sentences in there, like explaining why you should subscribe to my newsletter. And then I started, I subscribed. I just liked, again, the branding. I really liked the way it looked, the way it felt. And I've found a lot of great podcasts through your newsletter. So I guess the one question I'll ask you, like, why did you decide to start that newsletter, or how?
Yeah. So thank you very much. First of all, it's very kind words from you, and I'm glad you found it useful in helping you find some new podcasts to listen to. The origin story is fairly simple in the sense that newsletters in 2019 were sort of getting a little bit hot. A lot of people were starting a newsletter about, XYZ. I think the main reason why I started it was because I've loved podcasts for a long time. I was very early to podcasts. I started listening to podcasts when most people didn't even know what a podcast was. And I found that level of sort of audio information to be kind of jive with the way my brain works, And so, yes, I've loved podcasts for a long time, but I also ran into the problem of trying to find podcasts that, like you said, weren't necessarily dominating the top charts in Apple or Spotify or wherever else. And I found that the level of effort, at least at the time, that all of the major apps were making in terms of their editorial decisions for what to surface and what not to surface was pitiful. Now it's gotten better. A lot of the apps have made more effort. There's an app called, I can't remember the exact name, but I think it was just released by one of the major apps it's entirely dedicated to podcast discovery. And it's sort of, formed on top of the model of kind of having a feed that you scroll through. And every time you swipe up, you get a new podcast or an episode of a new podcast. So it is changing. Podcast discovery is changing, but I did feel when I started it like there was a big gap and a big opportunity for somebody to come in and, again, editorially insert themselves into saying, okay, I want to discover a podcast about, topic X, and let's talk about those podcasts. Let's drive some new listenership for them. Independent podcasters work so hard on their shows. And, they many times they don't deserve, they don't get the time of day, that their show probably deserves. Now, not all podcasts are great. Like with any medium, I am pitched a lot of crap. That's the truth. There's a lot of poorly made podcasts that fall off after a few episodes, and that's fine. That's normal. But there is a massive quantity of high quality shows that more people need to discover. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. And just thanks for it. I honestly look forward to that. Fridays are a great day because that's when it drops in, right? So,
thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, James, final 2 questions. What are 3 podcasts you'd recommend?
Okay, I thought about this and I figured that's a really tough question because there's so many podcasts. But I kind of split them up, first of all, into just like one of my favorites I've told my listeners about before. And I think 2 of these I've found on your newsletter, honestly, I think.
Okay.
But the number one I want to recommend is My Only Story Season 1 by Dion Wiggett in South Africa. It's only 4 episodes. It's a true crime live investigation. And it's just spectacular. When I heard this, I was like, brother, this is what we're doing. This is investigative journalism, storytelling, and art all wrapped into one. And he even is so bold as to say in his podcast, I think in the last episode, is like, that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to do something that could be art and, and almost science, investigative journalism at the same time. 4 episodes. It's called My Only Story. And I know it's season 1 I'm referring to. I know he put out another season, and I don't even think I listened to it because I just didn't want to. I have this beautiful memory of, I remember exactly where I was when I listened to it. I was driving up to Icelandic State Park in North Dakota for the Icelandic Fest, listening to My Only Story. And I was just like, this is amazing. So that's one. Then the other one is I put in the category, if you want to laugh. And I got this from you as well, Valley Heat, which is, I think you wrote in your newsletter, it made you laugh out loud while you were driving or something. And
the show is amazing.
Yeah. So if you just want to laugh and have a good laugh, listen to Valley Heat. And then for the third one, just because it's a friend of mine, you could say, and he's a good guy, Javier Leiva's Pretend podcast. Javier is, he's just a great guy doing a great show. So if you haven't listened to Pretend, that's one I would recommend.
And where can people find you online?
So the easiest, I guess, is website, dakotaspotlight.com, and you can find out pretty much everything about the show right there. And we got to come up with a new way of saying this, anywhere you get your podcast thing. Like podcasters have been saying that for like how long? There's got to be a more. We can't keep saying that forever. Yeah. Anywhere you get your podcast, it's starting to sound kind of. But it's true.
Yeah, I guess it's because the platforms are so fractured, right?
Yeah.
So people really, listen to podcasts in so many different modalities these days.
Mm-hmm.
But James, I really appreciate your time and thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Sebastian. It's been great.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Talk That Pod. Make sure to follow us on all the social places. Just search for Talk That Pod. And if you're not subscribed yet, this podcast is also available on YouTube at Talk That Pod Show. Also, if you liked what you heard, tell your friends about it. And if you really liked it, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And if you're a podcaster who wants to come on the show, go to talkthatpod.net and submit a request. Finding great podcasts is hard. That's why you should also check out Find That Pod. It's a podcast recommendation newsletter I write every week, bringing you 5 amazing new podcasts you should listen to. Subscribe today at findthatpod.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.